So, hey, Father Dan. Thank you, first of all, for agreeing to do this interview.
You're welcome. Thanks for the
Yeah,
opportunity and for taking this project on. There's a lot of good stories
of
out
course.
there.
And I was excited. I just gave you one of these.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the proof.
That's
Not
the proof.
finished yet, but I'm excited to put you in the back of that book because I have talked to a bunch of homeless people on the street, and they all know you, and they all say incredible things. So. The first question I'm really curious to know is we'll just start really broad. Like, we'd love to know your life story.
Wow. Well, I'll do it as quickly as I can. I'm the youngest of 6 children. I grew up on a small farm in rural western Michigan. Uh, Dad sold cars for a living. The farm was his hobby. Mom never had to work outside of the home. Um, yeah, I had a great childhood. 80 acres, hunted, fished, was really good in school. Felt the call to the priesthood as early as I can remember. Um, wasn't called to be celibate, which was the requirement in the tradition that I was in. So, in my first year in undergrad, I left the seminary and got a degree in history and went to work in clothing retail for about 15 years at a store in
Wow.
Grand Rapids, Michigan. Um, Discovered the tradition that I'm in now, the Episcopal Church. Discovered the call to ministry was still there. Worked as a development director, fundraiser for a street mission in Grand Rapids Mission District. Went off to seminary, got ordained. Spent my first 10 years in Benton Harbor, Michigan, 6 years in Flint as a priest, and I've been here in the Haight now for 2 years.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. Wow. Okay. Childhood in Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
hunting, and it sounds like a really close family.
Yeah, the youngest of six. The next oldest is 6 years older than me. So
Wow.
in sort of my preteen and teen years, it was as if I were an only child because the other five had long flown the coop.
Wow.
But yes, all my parents are both deceased, but my 5 siblings and I are all still among the living. So 16-year span between oldest and youngest. I'm the youngest.
Did they take care of you growing up? Was that like 6 years younger? It's
To a degree,
to a degree.
yeah, to a degree, but no, I mean, because mom didn't have to work outside the home, so she was always there, and dad's job was pretty much a 8 to 5 kind of job, so
Yeah.
nights and weekends he was home too.
Yeah, I could imagine you probably all like, went to church together,
Mm-hmm. Oh
and it
yeah,
was a really close knit community there.
close knit community. The parish where I grew up um, uh, was first settled by my great great grandfather and several other of the founding white immigrants, German immigrants primarily, who came over 1850s roughly.
Yeah.
So a lot of these families have deep roots and intermarried and that sort of thing too. So yeah, pretty small, close knit community.
Yeah. And now you're in Haight Ashbury. Tell me about what you love about this area.
You know that every day is the same and every day is different. Every day is the same because it is so much the same. There's sort of a static sense to it, right? There are the various people who spend their days out on the streets and sidewalks. The cast of characters may change, but they're
Yes.
there broadly. There are the merchants, there are the people who patronize the shops and the bars, right? There are the housed residents. So there's that's kind of all sort of a fixed thing that seems
Yeah.
every time, and the tourists and everything too. But then every day is different because the way that those different groups interplay and the way that I interact with them every day is different because you never know. I mean, there are some people I see almost every day, whether they're folk who are on the streets or housed neighbors or shop owners, but there are also folk who I might not see for, a few days or a week or more at a time, and then you run into them.
Yeah.
And then to see how, not only the opportunities that I have to engage with everyone, but to sort of be the observer of how different folk from different group
Yeah.
engage with each other.
Yeah. You've been here for, wait, how many years ago?
2 years.
Just 2 years.
Is all.
Oh wow! For some reason I thought longer. I think one of the reasons I thought longer is because I think you're one of the most recognized people here.
Most people think that we've been here longer, and
Mm.
I attribute a lot of that to the welcome in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
It seems as if you're here, and if you make any effort to be out in the community, people welcome you and invite you in to the circles pretty quickly, compared to other areas where you might be 20 or 30 years in a place and you're still the new person, right? But here, so a number of people, what, you've only been here 2 years? It seems like you've been here forever. But that's just in part because I'm intentionally out in the community and visible and engaging with people, but certainly in large part because both my wife and I have been very welcomed and accepted.
It's really sweet. I see you out sometimes with Kay, and for context, I think the first time we met was this incredible venue called Club Deluxe, where my friends and I would go to dance. That place is sadly closed, but you were often there, I think often with a beer.
Always with a beer.
I love it.
Usually with a shot to go along with it too. That's my blue collar Michigan roots is to have a shot and a beer. Yeah, Kate and I really so enjoyed and so miss Club Deluxe, because it was right around the corner, a block and a half away. So where else could you go for a $5 cover charge and beer that's competitively priced, let's say, but just to have such fantastic music and dancing, and then not have to worry about getting a car or the Muni or finding our way home, because it's just a block and a half away. So,
I think we were both probably equally sad when we found out Club Deluxe didn't make it. It's one of those last live music venues in this area. So only 2 years, but have you noticed changes within those 2 years, aside from your Club Deluxe closing?
A few shops opening and closing. There doesn't seem to be sort of a net gain of shops and economic development on Haight Street. Some have closed, some have opened. I think the changes that I've seen are probably more to do with me paying attention rather than sort of changes themselves. So just being a little more observant, being a little more engaged with people, knowing what to look for, I guess.
Yeah.
When you first get here, when you first move anywhere, I suppose, it's all pretty overwhelming and you're trying to figure it out. Yeah, so I wouldn't really say I've noticed a lot of sort of tangible change in the neighborhood in 2 years.
Well, that's good. I mean, some of that overlap is with the pandemic. Let's see, what
coming
are we,
at the
2023?
sort of the tail end of it.
Tail end.
For example, when we first got here, probably hear a lot about bars that I stop into. So Zam Zam,
Yes.
Zam Zam was the first bar that Kate and I went into. And when we were there, you still couldn't sit at the bar.
Yes.
Because of pandemic. You could get a drink, but you had to sit at one of the tables, right? Or going to the pork store, the diner that's right behind the church here. The diner counter was closed. You had to sit at a table. So that's sort of that coming out of pandemic when we could start to engage one with another.
Yeah.
So that's when we arrived. So it was an odd time to arrive because it wasn't. Things weren't opened up and connected as they are now.
Yeah, I'm actually excited. I'll if you have time after that, I'm very curious to see the church. I bet it's beautiful.
And the church too. When I arrived here, the whole call process, the whole interview process was done remotely.
Yeah.
Entirely. I did not physically lay eyes on any member of this congregation who called me here until Kate and I drove up in our U-Haul truck.
Yeah.
It was all through Zoom, so I knew what people looked like, and we had a Zoom tour of the rectory, the home we live in. We got a rough sketch of the floor plan, so we kind of knew what to bring and what to leave behind, but didn't actually see face to face a person until we pulled up.
Wow. And that's cool. And your place is probably right near. I'm actually.
It's right next door.
And I'm a block away.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Yep.
fun to make that realization.
Mhm.
Now, of all the people that sing your praises, obviously Sonny is someone that knows you really well, and he says you've done amazing things, and just being very human and very empathetic to those people that are homeless. And yeah, like I'm curious if it, obviously I'm sure it saddens you to see. I'm wondering what sort of insights and what sort of messages of hope you might have for that homeless community.
Sure. I I make sure that I tread very lightly. And it took a few months of me just being present before I got, let into let into that community.
Yeah.
With good reason. There's a fair bit of mistrust and holding religious folk at arm's length.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of folk have been, really damaged by the church in their upbringings, whether it was something that was, forced on them by parents and they're running away from that, or churches that were judgmental or whatever. There's lots of and people who may come in, religious people who may come in and want to try to evangelize and convert and thump Bibles on people, and that's just not my understanding of ministry or what it is to be a Christian or a priest. So for me, it's just presence, just asking permission. Can I hang out here?
Yeah.
Right, and then just kind of listen. Early on, I in this pouch right here, I carry dog treats.
Oh,
and
cool.
I carry cigarettes because so many of the folk on the street have dogs, and this is a great way to sort of build some rapport, a little entry point. And cigarettes, the same thing. So there are a number of people now. I mean, everybody knows I carry cigarettes, and people will either bum one from me, which is fine. Sometimes offer to pay.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll pay in exchange with another type of smokable. Vegetation.
It is Haight Street.
It is Haight Street.
It is Haight Street.
But sometimes I'll offer. Sometimes people will ask, but they know that I carry dog treats and cigarettes. So that's just a way to kind of break down some barriers too, and just mostly sit and listen and just observe and be present.
This is beautiful.
And so now the folk on the street who are more regulars and have that credibility in the community, in the neighborhood, can kind of vouch for me too. So if there's somebody new who's come into the neighborhood, a new traveler who's come in, and they see me, they might like, who's this freak, and what's he trying to sell me? But because I've got trust built up and credibility with Sonny and so many of the other folks on the street, I can kind of be vouched for that I'm okay. I'm not going to try to convert them or tell them they're going to hell or anything like that.
Yeah, that's lovely you say that. I've had the same experience. Like, it's actually fairly quick, like just building a little rapport. I haven't quite been around for 2 years, and I've had travel in there, but it is good when people realize you have the kind intention. And I'll say of the people that I've spoken to so far, it's even more broad. Like it's a lot of people have bad experiences with authority.
Sure.
And certain disciplined churches maybe fall into that category of authority. The police, there's obviously a lot of people that are without homes have a huge distrust for the police. Sometimes very understandably so. So I think that's wonderful. You have, that lovely outreach to people. I got some fun questions here. First of all, further down, what brings you joy? I already know a beer.
Oh man, my wife brings me joy. Cooking a good meal. Beer, dancing. Seeing someone on the street who I haven't seen in a while, when they travel. Sometimes that they're going away, and they might tell me, but sometimes they just disappear, and I have no idea, right? And then you see them again, after a month or 2 or 3 or 6, and that's just to know that they're alive, right?
100%.
And and making the journey back. Members of my congregation, just my work. I mean, it sounds kind of, sounds kind of corny, but almost everything that I do in my work is joyful. What doesn't, honestly, is the administrative kind of stuff. The paperwork, the stuff that that kind of stuff that has to be done.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of a drag, but that doesn't occupy too much of my time.
Yeah.
So I'm really fortunate that I'm the only priest serving this congregation. There's a retired priest who assists me on Sunday, but I'm essentially responsible for all of the duties of ministry around here, and yet I have the congregation understands how important it is for me to be present on the street, and I have ample time to do that. Don't ask me how. I mean, it seems like I have more hours at my disposal sometimes than there actually are in a day. So I rarely get bogged down with administrative kind of chain to the desk. And even when I am, every day, I'm able to be out on Haight Street at least for a few minutes, walking up and down the street, checking on people.
Yeah. It's always fun that I get to bump into you on Haight Street. I think, more than anyone else. You and Tony B, and you're right, some people transient, so you won't see them for a while. But that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's just so fun to see him. So, one of the guys in the book, where'd he go? Smurf,
Smurf,
they were traveling and came back and there's a baby and there's a pretty nice rig that they have and it's like, wow, just to and such a smile, I mean, just as I think you say in the book, such a great personality. So how can how can that not bring me joy when you see somebody coming back after a few months and they're healthy and well and have a little one and
he and Timber they showed me inside their little rig, which was really sweet. I took some photos. They're very proud of it. It's kind of interesting. Like I've made jokes with some of the people on the street. There was a moment when I was talking to Derek the Drifter, who often has a dog on his back.
Yes. Yep.
And we heard a crash. And we were actually having a deep conversation. Like, some of these people have quite amazing educations. I'm sure you do too. So we're talking about generative AI, like how AI might take jobs away. We hear a crash, and I have to show you the photo later. And I sort of went up, and I think, what happened? Like, it was a car crash. Was anyone hurt? A car had rear-ended a bus. A self-driving car. So I went back and said, okay, like people's jobs are safe for a little bit longer. But the joke was, like, with something like that potentially putting a lot of people out of the job, like I think there's going to be a lot of more sympathy. People realize, and there could be more people out on the streets. I don't have the crystal ball, but I mean, if there's a recession and a bunch of people lose their jobs, I think there'll be a lot more sympathy to realize in this country, like, it's very easy to end up on the street. Could happen. It could happen to you. Could happen to me. It just takes a couple of unfortunate events.
Yeah. I mean, I've had some. You mentioned the education and the wisdom. I mean, I've had just some fascinating theological conversations, with folk who are really, I mean, people, have really spent, a lot of time reading and thinking, whether it's theology or, other, any other sorts of disciplines too. I mean, it's, I think that's one of the stereotypes is that there's, just kind of an ignorance or a lack of book smarts or whatever, but folk are remarkably, bright and wise, and of course in ways that maybe you and I can't imagine, because I mean the street smarts, how to be able to sort of read your environment and how to be able to survive and know how to work all of the systems to try to, I mean, it's so complicated, it's to try to keep everything straight, all the different agencies and all the different
There's a little group I'm involved with called Atlas. We're trying to do I'll have to let you know, I think it's on the 22nd. We're trying to have a little bit of a day of love that brings together a few different homeless organizations. We don't know where it'll be hosted yet. It's all up in the air, but it's a complicated ecosystem. So one of the things I say in the book is, like, there's no one solution in homelessness. Even if you had all these resources, everyone's story is so different.
Mm-hmm.
Your story is different. I mean, you're
Mm-hmm.
not homeless, but
Mm-hmm.
we all have different narratives.
Mm-hmm.
And there's people that we say, some people say chronically, that's a tricky word, but like
Mm-hmm.
institutionalized.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've been in jail or homeless for long enough, there's a certain amount of pride.
Mm-hmm.
And some people I know, like, and I think more and more people, even with money, might be choosing to live in a van because it's so expensive here.
Right. Yeah.
It's crazy. What brings you hope, Father Dan?
The incremental, sometimes painfully slow steps that I see when an individual from one group is able to intersect with another positively. What I mean by that is when those barriers get broken down, I see still a fair amount of sort of, keeping people at arm's length.
Yes.
You know, complaints or concern about the number of people hanging out the corner of Haight Ashbury, and and the tension that arises sometimes between people who are housed and people who are on the street, or merchants, and sort of how there can be and are tensions sometimes. But I've seen a couple of housed neighbors, who stop and take the time to chat with the folk who are hanging out on the street corner, and have just simple positive engagements. That brings me hope, because I we are afraid of what we don't know, and we keep ourselves distanced from what we're afraid of.
Yeah.
And I see that so much in this neighborhood, perhaps going both ways. I mean, there's and if we can stop and take the time just to engage, one-on-one, and make eye contact with somebody, say hello. Those kind of interchanges bring me hope, because I think that's the way that we're going to. I mean, it sounds kind of, kind of pie in the sky, but I think that's, AI can't do that for us. Social media can't do that for us.
Yeah.
The only thing that can do that for us is to look one another in the eye,
Yeah.
and simply say, "Hello, how are you doing?" More often than not, you get a positive response back. And me, I am wearing, in some regard, the clothing of authority, right? I mean, it's the Haight, so I get all the time, is that a costume, or I like your outfit, or whatever, because but the this also gives me, or I take the permission to engage with people, whether they're people on the street people or whatever. This because I'm wearing this uniform, if you want to call it that. I take that as some license to be able, if I've never met you before and we're walking down Haight Street, just to look in the eye and say, "Hey, good morning." Whereas if it were somebody dressed like you, not wearing this, that might seem kind of off-putting or strange, right?
It's a struggle for me, because when I moved here, I noticed there's not a lot of eye contact.
Right, exactly.
If anything, I get more eye contact and more friendliness from homeless people.
Oh, absolutely.
And I put that in the book.
Yeah.
And
you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So for me, that's so the amount of, it's very, very rare when someone is rude to me.
Yeah.
Almost always people are kind, whether they're prosperous folk, making their way to and from work, or folk, person on the street, or anybody in between.
Yeah.
But it's that, if we can figure out in this neighborhood, in this community, if we can figure out, as prosperous housed people, and as merchants, and as tourists, and as patrons of the pubs and the shops, and as people who spend their days on the streets and the doorways, if we can figure out just how to make some eye contact and say hello. And I realize too that for I'm a reasonably tall, well fit, white guy. You
Yes.
know,
Yeah.
I know that it can be harder for folk who feel and are more vulnerable to do that, because
Yeah.
that can invite unwelcome interchanges too. I mean,
Yes.
I get that, and yet, you know, if we keep averting our eyes in our own bubble, so what brings me hope is when I see people getting out of their bubble just a little bit, taking that risk.
Yeah.
Taking the risk in broad daylight in a neighborhood that isn't the Tenderloin, right?
Yeah.
It does have a different feel to it entirely.
It does.
That is a reasonably safe neighborhood with, a bunch of folk who are on the street.
Yeah.
If you're gonna take a chance to do that, this is probably a good neighborhood to do it in.
Yeah, and I think people like you and Tony B is also incredibly prevalent on the street. I think it's good to have people at a gateways to explain how important it is to break down those barriers,
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise there's such a distrust between
Mm-hmm.
different populations.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that's a fantastic answer. That brings me hope as well.
Yeah, good.
What is your hardest? Oh, and by the way, I want to say this. I think this is a little funny aside.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't always see you dressed like this.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes out in the bar, and it was funny because when Sonny talks about you, and you're probably modest about this, but you were prosperous at one point, and it sounds like in fashion. And so it explains the stylishness, and I also think that was wonderful. You sort of went from probably quite a high paid job to be like, oh, I want to serve the people.
I don't know if I would call it that. Maybe higher higher status.
Higher status.
Higher status.
But no, I think it explains your style.
but where I have been blessed to work as a priest have been in largely poor communities.
Yeah.
Benton Harbor. A small community, a small city, maybe 10,000 people in the city proper. One of the poorest and highest crime per capita in the country.
Wow.
Going from there to Flint, a city now of maybe 80,000 people. At its peak, 200,000 when GM was cranking out cars. So Flint has lost more than half of its population.
Oh, dear.
Again, one of the poorest and most crime-ridden per capita violent cities in the country. So coming to the Haight-Ashbury has not been anything that's been particularly strange. I mean, that's just seems to be the kind of ministry that I'm suited to, is being more kind of a center city sort of parish rather than a suburban or a small town. That's just where I guess where my gifts are, my comfort level is.
Beautiful.
So yeah, if I'm not wearing this, I mean, I'm almost always in my clerical collar.
Yes.
But otherwise it's jeans and a leather jacket.
Yeah.
The day wear, and that's night wear.
I love that. I got a few more questions. I'm glad I'm taking the video because with your permission, I might post it because I can't fit all of his beautiful stuff in the book. What is your hardest life lesson, Father Dan?
Learning to slow down and to not try so hard to get my way.
Oh God, teach me that. I'm trying to learn that lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To sort of to slow down and just to let some things be. I don't have to be, this isn't original. Would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? Most of my life I would rather be right. I'd rather be happy now. And that means, and of course being right means getting my way because, I know everything. I mean, don't we all? So, no. So I would I'm still learning how to do that. But that I've become much more content, at least, the more I'm able to practice just letting some of that go.
Wow. That's beautiful. I think you'll find this amusing. In the course that I'm doing, they say these for things that have control in our life more than we could ever realize, and they drive a lot of negativity. Well, okay, they call them the four assholes. One is being right, and that also, I think that's one of my biggest ones. I like to be right. I've got a history in academia. I like to be right. Being in control, which is often related, looking good, and avoiding pain. So it's sort of funny. We might have the same the same alignment. Yeah. And it's good. I think being aware of that is a huge step.
Yeah, and it's taken.
You don't seem righteous at all, by the way.
It's taken,
but
it's taken some. I mean, relative hard knocks. I mean, it's just I've learned some things. Over the course of life, but certainly more particularly over the course of ordained ministry, of being a priest, and just try to have that self-awareness of I could do this better or differently or not at all, and just let it go.
Yeah. That is beautiful. What's something you're proud of?
Oh, man.
Many things, I'm sure.
Many things. In my personal life, I've got 4 great kids.
Wow.
Proud of them. They're all fiercely independent and flew the coop early and are doing their own thing. So I like to think I had some part to play in raising them right. But professionally and in my occupation, that I've just discovered the benefits of just what I call a ministry of presence. That it just took some time. That simply just being visible and the benefit, the dividend, I guess that pays.
Yeah.
And that some of that comes with just sort of slowing down and tamping down some ambitions to do the next big great thing. Being able to find satisfaction, contentment, a degree of happiness, and that I'm proud of that. Because I'm sort of the age and of the temperament where you still want to strive, and I would rather just be, I guess.
Oh my God, you are speaking to my soul right now. Yeah. Just to be. Yeah. Wow. I think I might have 2 more questions. The first one is advice you might offer someone that's newly homeless.
I don't know if I would have any advice to give to someone who's new. Well, here's what I've observed. The most generous people tend to be the poorest.
True.
When I was working in the street mission in Grand Rapids, I would have thought, coming from a competitive background, that you keep information to yourself, right? Because if I share information with you, you might get something that I want or that I need. Not the case. In the street mission in Grand Rapids, this is where I first learned this. If there was somebody new coming in, analogous to somebody new coming into the neighborhood here, others who were in that similar situation would say, "Oh, you go to this place for that service. You go to this place to get this. You go to this place to get that." There was a sense of not hoarding or not scarcity, right? That there's enough to go around. So I guess, and I see that here as well. That people are free with information. Well, this is where you go, to get this taken care of or to get that question answered. So if I were advising somebody newly homeless, go to where other folk are who are newly homeless and humbly, ask for some help. You'll be surprised because the folk who are on the street know best. Right? Where to access different services, how to survive.
Yeah.
Right? I know a little bit, but I couldn't tell a newly homeless person how to survive. Find somebody who lives the life.
Yeah.
And they will astonish you with their generosity and compassion.
Especially here. I think.
But I think
Yeah.
especially if you come with a degree of humility, and I know sometimes on the street you have to be tough. You have to kind of have a presence, right? That's part of survival.
Mm.
But in this neighborhood, no, I think some humility and genuineness goes a long way. The folk who are spend their days on the streets here, whether they're truly homeless or not, and a number of them are, have some degree of housing. But
Yes.
they hang
Yes.
out here because this is their living room.
Yeah, actually, I think that's wonderful. It's hard to distinguish.
Yeah. So
between-
find,
yeah.
but and people, you'll be astonished with how compassionate and generous the folk in your straits are.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I mean, Sonny says he often hangs out and the kids take care of him and he takes care of them. And I think a lot of them actually come here. Yeah. So
I asked that question of a number of the folk on the street some time ago when there was some real tension between the housed community, the upstairs community, right, the people who live, and the street level. And I asked that of many of the folk on the street. There are thousands of street corners in San Francisco, right? Why do you hang out here? Well, why does anybody come here, right? This is sort of the nexus. This is where it was. This, the Dad and Janice and Jimmy, and this is, there's still a vibe here. Come out here for community. This is where their friends hang out. This is where they can, access some services that are happening in this neighborhood. This is where they can keep track on people. They can. So I sort of see this as, folk who are lucky enough to have housing. I have a living room. I have a stoop. I have a backyard. If I want to hang out with friends of mine, I can invite them to my place to sit on the stoop or the living room or the backyard. If you're living in a tent, if you're living in a vehicle, if you're living in an SRO, if you're sleeping in a doorway, you don't have a stoop, a living room, a backyard. So where do you socialize?
Intersection of Haight and Ashbury,
right? Right?
And it's great. I forgot the gentleman's name, but like a couple of them are definitely, they take pride and they often sweep that area clean because that is their hangout spot where they trade stories and community.
And it's not a universally cohesive group. There's nobody in charge. Like any groups of people, some get along with others better than others, right? There's tensions as there are in churches and workplaces and families, whatever. I mean, it's and folks seem to, for the most part, manage those relationships and those tensions as well as anybody else. It just happens that passers-by are seeing it because it's on the street corner, rather than happening, in a backyard or behind the doors of a home where there might be tensions and such. So of course, I mean, everybody has a view of the living room of the neighborhood. Because we're walking by it, through it, or seeing it from our upstairs windows, whatever.
Oh man, I love this. I guess people in the house trying to make some clever parallel between the walls we have. And when you're right, when everything's exposed like that, you can see the best and the worst of people sometimes.
Of course.
But to my mind, you're right. I mean, you and I are both fairly tall, and probably rarely sort of feel threatened in this area. And sometimes I see transient people passing through, and I have a lot of sympathy. Like, even for addiction, like I definitely don't judge, because I'm sure there's a set of unfortunate events could happen to me that turn me into an addict within a week. Like, it is a very sad thing to see, but generally speaking, they take care of each other. They share food, and then people that are poorest can absolutely be the most generous.
Share food, share weed, share a bottle, share information. Look out after one another. And that's, in no small part why I feel safer in this neighborhood. I mean,
Yeah.
my size notwithstanding, and Kate, as well, because there are a lot of people who know us and love us and respect us
Yes.
and kind of have our backs too.
Yeah.
So, I feel like I've got some support behind me. I don't. So it makes me feel even more secure. And I think then for others in this neighborhood, house neighbors who may feel nervous, anxious, etc. If we can, like I said earlier, if we can figure out a way to break some of those barriers down, I'll bet that the folk who are feeling less secure might feel a little more secure
Yeah.
when they come to know the people who are on the street and that they're not out to harm them.
Yeah.
In fact, if anything, they'll look out for you. Because if there is, they don't put up with bullshit in this neighborhood any more than you or I would in our houses, right?
Yeah.
So if there's somebody who's dangerous or who is just not living into the culture
Yeah.
of the street corner, they're
Yeah.
asked to leave. That's a good thing, right? That's what that keeps this neighborhood actually safer.
I like it. It doesn't seem like someone made a joke recently about California in general as being, was it? Instead of progressive, they said passive aggressive, and they sort of have the same sound to it. So I laughed, and I don't really see that with people who are on the street. They don't often have that filter, so they'll say how it is, and I actually prefer that. I do think passive aggressive behavior is eating away at San Francisco a little bit. To talk openly about people's hopes and dreams and fears, even on the street, is I think very healthy.
It is. Yeah.
Last question. I'm excited. Actually, I really liked asking about the joy and hope questions, but this is just wider. Like, what is your vision and what are your aspirations in this community?
It really goes back to that, to breaking down those barriers. I think of this. Unless you've been here pre-1967, pre-Summer of Love, and if you come here since then, one should have a bit of a sense of what the history of this neighborhood is and what it's like now.
Yeah.
Right? And if you move into this neighborhood, whether you're, buying a house, renting an apartment, opening a business, whatever, you're moving into a heritage and a culture that is not exactly like 1967, of course, and the really rough years that followed that.
Yeah.
But you're still moving into an area that has that in its blood and its bones, right?
Yeah.
So, to expect it to be a different neighborhood, to expect this neighborhood to have a character, duplicate of any other neighborhood, North Beach, the Outer Sunset, the whatever, if that's the neighborhood you want, maybe that's where you should settle. If you're in this neighborhood, this is kind of the culture. So embrace it, to be able to break down those barriers, to be able to see that nearly everybody who's in this neighborhood, whether they're living here or passing through, are decent, good, respectable folk with all different levels of problems and possibilities, right? From astonishingly wealthy to incredibly poor and everything in between, people who are just trying to make it. Everybody's just trying to make it. Even if you're the most prosperous, you're just trying to make it. You got all sorts of benefits and privileges and everything else. I mean, but everybody's just trying to make it. So, this corner has, this neighborhood sort of has a history of that. So embrace that, I guess. The people that you meet are just trying to make it too, and extend a little grace, a little friendship. say hey to somebody new for the first time. Take the risk and look somebody in the eye. Maybe not at 2 o'clock in the morning when the street's dark. I get that. But 2 in the afternoon,
Yeah.
probably you'll be okay.
Yeah.
And you just might meet somebody who will bring some joy to your life.
Yeah. I think, I talk about the homelessness crisis, but also I hear from more and more people like a loneliness pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's probably a fun note to finish on. I'd be devastated if this didn't record. It seems to be recording.
Yeah.
I'm so excited about this interview, and the breaking down of the barriers.
Yeah. Well, loneliness, you're exactly right. And I think it's so easy to be lonely in a very densely populated area because you can be anonymous. In a small town, a small neighborhood, people, you really can't hide from anyone, right? But here, you're among thousands and thousands. I don't know how many people live just in this ward. It's just in this precinct. It's just it's nuts, right? So if you have your earbuds on, your headphones on, and you got your hat pulled down and your hoodie up, and you're just walking straight down the street, you're sending a signal, I guess. Don't leave me alone.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if that doesn't amplify some of that loneliness too. The more inured we become to sort of a self-imposed isolation. I fear that we'll hit as individuals and as a community, we'll hit kind of a tipping point where we'll really lose some of that ability to be able to engage with one another. And then how do you recover? If you we saw glimpses of that with the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Especially in school-age children who normally would learn how to socialize, and they're in virtual school for 2 years. And the struggles that I hear anecdotally from parents and from teachers on how school-age kids are because they lost some of that formative time, right? In how to socialize. I think adults lost some of that in a different sort of way. We have the memory and the neural connections probably to remember how to do that, where kids maybe didn't. Some of those didn't get knit together quite the same way.
Yeah.
But we're still. I think if there's a danger that we face, it's that kind of loneliness, and then. We fear each other even more, and then we have the political and the societal polarization that we're already seeing, because we just don't trust, one another, and we otherize and demonize and stay in our own little bubble.
Yeah, us and them is its own form of nasty disease.
And this is a neighborhood that I've noticed that is very resistant to that. If something else gives me hope, is that people, I do see people looking out for one another, engaging with one another. There's a great degree of interplay that I see. That is, I think, fighting back against possible loneliness and otherizing. And I think that's great. So, boy, if more people could kind of in this neighborhood could participate in that, they might find their lives changing for the better.
I love it. And a lot of people I've interviewed in this book have their own ideas and do their own beautiful things of breaking down boundaries. But I'm super excited to put you at the end of the book because I feel like more than anyone else, you really get it. Thank you.
Yeah,
I just wanted to say thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm blessed to be, I think, in the right place at the right time, and to have the sort of to be, to have an occupation that allows me to do what I do.
Yes. Father Dan.
All right.
Oh,
Andrew.
I'm excited to see the church.
Oh, all right. We'll turn that thing off and we'll take a little walk.
So let's do it. Thank you so much, Father Dan.